Why do people emigrate? Who emigrates? Is there any difference between the push and the pull? For immigrants from one place to another? Sometimes it's an honour status thing. Sometimes it's to save your own life. You may think you can make a better life for someone at home. Perhaps it's just a fashionable thing to do. Jumping on the bandwagon, you've been fed a lie through national television or word of mouth. That something's better somewhere else. The grass is greener on the other side of the fence.
Along the banks of the Seine, just take a walk.
That fence may be enclosing an open prison. It may be a prison of the mind that you've constrained yourself within, or your peers have beaten you down into. What's the cost of emigrating? What are you leaving behind? What are the unforeseeables of where you're going? Do you still have that resilience and adaptability? Are you able to emigrate and have a parasitic existence with other expats? In a very loose sense, a community that speaks your mother tongue and gives you preferential treatment or specialist treatment. You may have paid up front or having to pay your way. Whether you're an economic migrant trying to magnify your opportunities, or people with a wealth of resources of their own that are just trying to find another place where their resources are valued more, where their money goes further for a little while, and so consequently where their status is higher. They can't class quite the same by their class because their money transcends that. Other people are making a discreet rejection of the culture that they come from and perhaps their friends. They don't want their children to go to the schools that they work in that are feeding them the wrong values. They want to hark back to another time in a simpler system, like they grew up in themselves and they're buying themselves a decade or two. Strangely, they may not hold the politics of the place that has formed the system that they're attracted to. And their very presence and status changes what they've sought. Of course, there are a lot of variables, compromises, and constraints. Do people really? I've had enough of my colleagues and my job. I'm going to jack it all in, pack up and leave. Or does the job finish them? I'm sure there's an element of both, and it's a bit of a career suicide sometimes.
They say Paris has always been that way.
Moving abroad to live in a different country is often very much like starting a new business. Sometimes people want to do both at the same time as maintenance. But any new business is a gamble, and emigrating is an all-in. But businesses do fail. A number of restaurants, cafes, don't recoup their initial outlay. People want to maintain the lifestyle and dream, so they get into debt thinking by next year we'll be on our feet. But the initial interest, curiosity was all there was.
Goods are displayed. There's also bound to be rough trade.
I have moved to France, fleeing a decade of Tory government and a further decade of Labour pseudo-Tory government, ignoring the wishes of 2 million people marching through central London against Tony Blair's war in Iraq, and the MI5 bumping off our own weapons of mass destruction scientist, David Kelly, and then protecting the most likely person to have done it when he attacks his girlfriend with a machete, shouting his ultra-Nazi slogans. I'm fleeing another condemn decade, where the most trusted centrists compromise themselves by joining Facebook, as a payoff sellout price for causing what they've always stood against. Until very recently, French politics has been the closest thing to a Jeremy Corbyn decade that I've been able to find. People in France, thankfully, look at you in complete confusion and disbelief when you tell them there's no such thing as community. Margaret Thatcher taught us that. She was a self-appointed female fall guy for the dark sources of Brexit, when those same dark forces thought they were extending their rule and providing a back door for America that wouldn't be resisted. My vote is needed more in Britain than it is France. I no longer feel that British values are being exported to Poland and Hungary when people that have experienced them return to retire amongst their relatives in relative richness. Perhaps to some extent, but for the most part, they're laughing. But no one's laughing at the torture that is Brexit, forcing people home. Expats living abroad really do have a similar sort of circumstance now to illegal immigrants. It's more of an extrinsic push than a pull of latent dreams.
That's what they mean when they say, "Get
You may think you're smarter than the locals. You've learned a trick or two. You can import a few ideas from back home. But you forget that people are great imitators. You're not in those extended family networks that can work to rule. And as America has found, they can turn the tables on the originator. Only Britain and France in Europe are expected to grow in size over this next century. People are still gravitating from the country to the cities. If you're looking for peace and quiet and good health care, where your carer comes from isn't necessarily your best option. And are your language skills really up to nuances of diagnosis in Bulgarian? And if you're learning that language, what's it actually telling you about the culture and what is it bringing out of your personality? Spanish, for example, typically you don't win an argument by persuasive, tangential thought melding. It's just by shouting larger than your opponent and who your friends are. You could have moved to Cornwall for that.
Who's that of old town under the sun?
If 51% of your nation votes to say you cannot, does that make people more determined to assert their right to roam? Or do they just accept the cold, the dark, and the limited personal space? I've fallen into the trap of wanting to live in a very big house in the country. I've wanted to feed an architectural daydream of being able to build my own personal expression without the constraints of an unenlightened client and overly controlled finances. Perhaps legislation itself could drive the move overseas. Many people have retired to a place where their aches and pains aren't so bad because of the warmth. It's not quite so wet. The hours of yearly sunshine don't get them down quite so much. But when their pension or savings aren't accessible from that place anymore because 51% of the countries say, no, keep it at home. And reciprocally, other countries say, we're going to take it off you because your country is forcing you to keep it at home. The viability of your dream can turn into scary monster nightmares. You can't come home to what you knew. You can no longer afford what you knew. Your buyer beware due diligence of that gîte or wedding venue business can quickly seem like a pipe dream just because of how an algorithm treats you. What little choices you make. The family life out in the country, watching the children running around, may have left you. It's an empty nest syndrome. You may have never had that nest, that core family in the first place. And you've tried to escape that constant reminder of school friends around you that have been able to fulfil that. You may consider that you're gravitating towards like-minded people. The only gay in the village will always gravitate towards the big city lights for a time until they recognise that they're not special. Divorced and desperate people also tend to gravitate towards cities. Barcelona, London, Turin. There's a niche subculture that's slightly different in each of these, and go with what suits your mental proclivities. Gay is done slightly differently in each.
All lovers here should fail to act. Alice would be sad. Said gay Paris.
You might be heading off to a destination where you had a wonderful holiday once, twice, or every year. A place where you got married, perhaps. You might be chasing a high of your youth, while you're experiencing a law of diminishing returns that probably won't decrease with destination. You may feel caged by expected depression, and pushing out from that to anywhere beyond this. You might have a relative richness compared to a local population. You automatically have brought generations of good fortune that other families haven't been so fortunate to have consecutive, and that can breed resentment. But can money buy you love? If you are exploiting parts of the local population, if you teleported in, you could teleport straight back out again. What loyalties do they owe to you beyond their next paycheck? Comparatively, from your source culture to your destination culture, you may be of a similar class to your neighbours, but as a fairly unreadable foreigner, you come across as quite classless, really. But ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your new country, is the way that you've got to think of how they look at you. Or close your mind to that like an early onset dementia. Are you going to be dependent on other longer standing or wealthier expats from your previous country or same language that you are just fresh meat to? If your children are at a local school, you can expect to have your children do all that hard integration work for you. You become your child's dependent in that sense. You only get invited to the parties on their good graces. And school can be difficult enough as a foreigner without having that extra pressure. But as an étranger, as a foreigner, you will attract attention, not just from the authorities that require you to get a new passport, new residence permit. You will be observed closely and all your secrets will be found out. From behind the scenes, GDPR, special measures, excuses. Expect that the laws of your home country, those norms, go out the window for a foreigner. I have always seen the good in people and I've had no contact with criminals in my home country. But moving to Sicily or moving to Paris, or just the closing ranks of a well-connected old boy who doesn't like the cut of your jib, can expose you to the criminal neediness of those poorer people that you're there to condescend over. They don't necessarily receive your trickle-down with graciousness.
I thought our love so brightly begun would burn through eternity. Who told the lie? Love can never die.
would like a bit. Why do I fall asleep for an hour after I've eaten my evening meal without fail? Is it to do with the glass of wine that I had before the meal? Is it the size of the meal? Can I manage to keep myself awake in that somnolence state by reading or watching a film? No. Can I hack? Somnolence takes over. I don't want to go too far into the tracheal. Serotonin, melatonin. This is like what you'd have in your happy pill.